Okay, so once again, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to yet another webinar of the RESISTIRÉ branch series. As you are all aware, the main focus of today's webinar will be on educational resilience to crisis. We'll have the opportunity to listen to 3 inspiring testimonies of our invited speakers. I will introduce them more in details right before their panel presentations. For the moment, I would only like to warmly thank to Lenka Felcmanová, Matthias Weißschuh, and Işık Tüzün for accepting our invitation and joining us today. All of our panelists in their daily lives, in one way or another, they work towards building more inclusive, accessible, and caring school environments. How they do it exactly, we will discover that in a few minutes during their presentations. But before we dive into the discussion on the challenges of modern education, and before we listen to some positive examples of how we can approach and face them, let me just briefly summarize the RESISTIRÉ project that is bringing us all together here today. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the project, it aims to understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and respective policy responses on gendered inequalities around Europe. We collect a broad variety of data through policy mappings, individual narratives, workshops, interviews, and surveys, with the intent of analyzing how different inequality domains, such as work and labor market, the economy, or education that we will be discussing today, intersects with selected inequality grounds, such as gender, ethnicity, race, socio-economic status, or sexual orientation, and so on. Building on these insights, we design and devise policy recommendations and some practical, innovative solutions, aiming to reduce the impact of the pandemic on vulnerable groups, at least in these specific contexts. So, moving to the topic of today's event, certainly there is no need to convince anyone that the sudden closure of schools due to the lockdowns had a tremendous impact on students, teachers, and parents. This unexpected COVID-driven digital transformation of education contributed to widening of already existing gaps within classrooms, as it hit those already vulnerable the hardest. For this reason, the domain of education became one of the area of focus in the second cycle of the RESISTIRÉ project. And I will now pass the floor to my colleague, Charula, who will introduce briefly the main findings that emerged from our analysis. Charula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Good morning, everyone. So, let me share my screen. Right, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. Perfect.
Right, so very briefly, I'm just going to present to you the fact sheet that we have developed as part of the RESISTIRÉ project, which was about resilient education systems. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a bit about the problem statement, some insights from RESISTIRÉ, but also better stories who have identified as part of the project that have given us inspirations for all our recommendations. So the problem statement, I mean, the closure of educational facilities, of course, has influenced the lives of young people, their families, and education and educators were actually forced to move quickly to a transition, from a traditional on-site teaching to actually online education. And we did see that the educational experience seemed to be conditioned by housing and family, whether students had a dedicated space to do their education, whether digital tools were available. But we also saw that there was a lack of training and support for new modes of teaching, especially from an educator's perspective. There were also evidence about gaps in terms of educational attainment and how online education actually affected educational attainment. There were widening existing gaps within education. We saw those gaps actually kind of aggravating. And we did see that actually across different European countries, that there was no European country that had a crisis management strategy for education. Especially if we consider actually, and we know the disproportionate impact that crisis can have on vulnerable groups. So we thought it's quite important how the impact of pandemic actually is determined by the resilience of education systems. And what we mean by resilience is more about the ability of education systems to adapt to new situations such as the crisis, and actually ensure that the quality standards remain the same for all. So in terms of insights from RESISTIRÉ, there were some key topics that we have identified. One of those was the digital skills and vulnerable people. So we found that there was a lot of emphasis on digital skills, but there was limited access to equipment and materials, but also in terms of the digital skills and competencies that students and educators had. We also see that the presence of peer and teacher support networks was actually quite limited and reduced. Particularly for students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, we found that they were less likely to engage with online education. And we did see for particular populations such as migrant children, they had less access to home computer. They were more likely to be in overcrowded spaces where the access for online education space was quite limited, but there were also a lot of language issues. And we also found the lack of training on online education delivery from an educator's perspective. When it comes to a gender perspective in digital skills and STEM, even before the pandemic, there were measures that were targeting women to advance digital skills and engage with STEM. But we did see that during the pandemic, the measures actually overemphasized and kind of like targeted much more the digital skills. When it came to educational outcomes, there were particular evidence about students feeling that the pandemic and transition to online learning have actually made them feel that they would have learned more, they would have got better grades or finished earlier if this didn't happen, if there wasn't this transition to online learning. There was also evidence of increasing dropout rates due to barriers in accessing and unequal opportunities to online learning. Another key issue that was coming out from evidence, quantitative and qualitative evidence, but also through our open studios, was actually that there was a key issue of mental health and well-being for students, parents, but also teachers. And there were particular concerns, medical concerns that were raised in particular countries about sleep problems, increased headaches, and deteriorating mental health among girls. In an open studio where we had students participating, they raised issues about psychological problems and mental illness, and they actually highlight the need for early detection of mental health in students. And in narratives that we had with students in RESISTIRÉ, with interviews, they were actually talking about how difficult it was to maintain motivation during disruption, and actually how the pandemic had a negative effect in terms of their social skills and coming back to the schooling environment and how to communicate again with their classmates or with their, their co-students. What was interesting was something that we found was that during the pandemic, because of online education, bullying and harassment and abuse in school actually seemed to be put on hold. But of course, digital violence kind of like seemed to emerge. There were also new communication patterns in relation to what we said about social skills, students coming back to schooling and having to adjust to a new reality, to a new communication language, and to new patterns, new social patterns with distancing and wearing masks, becoming quite challenging for them. The last key issue that we identified through the RESISTIRÉ data was the lack of consultation on policy development and implementation. And we did find particular groups, students, parents, including those from migrant groups and disabilities and low socioeconomic background, actually not being consulted in government measures, and actually the needs and perspectives of students and teachers and parents seem to be ignored. So that seemed to lead to poor design and student disengagement, and it highlighted kind of a need for collective student voice and better data and consultation with marginalized groups. In terms of better stories, and better stories is a concept that is was coined by Dina Georgis, and we're using it in the RESISTIRÉ project. And better stories about promising and inspiring practices. It could be policies, it could be civil society initiatives that they're not actually a perfect fix, you know, they're not panacea, you know, they're not solving everything, but actually they do illustrate how a particular societal situation could be improved. And we found 3 better stories in relation to education systems. One was about support for the Roma community in Portugal. So one of the charities in Portugal actually worked with Roma students in community centers, providing access and facilitating access to online learning platforms, but they also supported them in terms of helping them not to fall behind at school where their parents might not have been able to help. The second initiative we found was from a government agency on education in Scotland, where they worked closely with the teachers' unions, but also they had a lot of input from disadvantaged children and young people. And what they did, they implemented an equity audit, which kind of led to a deeper understanding of how the pandemic had impacted young people, but also had helped them in identifying distinct focus areas for inclusive recovery. And the last initiative was coming from Turkey. The local authorities of Ankara Metropolitan Municipality in Turkey actually had provided internet infrastructure and free Wi-Fi to 928 villages that actually lacked internet. And that did not only allow accessing education remotely, but also in some cases helping with accessing work. And they also provided digital devices to those that actually did not have any. So that kind of helped in actually enabling the internet access, but also, you know, enabling education and work in some cases. So I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much. And I think it's time to go to our panelists. Really looking forward to hear from them, their insights.
Thank you very much, Carola, for this great recap of the RESISTIRÉ findings and for sticking perfectly to the time limits as well. We will go back to our results or precisely our recommendations later on during this webinar, but right now we will move to the main point of today's event, so to the panel presentations. Just before we start, I will maybe say a few words about the structure of the panel. So we will have 3 panelists. Each of them will have around 10 minutes for their presentations. We should have still enough time to have 1 follow-up question directly after the intervention. But if not, no worries, not all is lost. We will have a roundtable discussion after this panel, and so if you have any questions, please write them in the chat, and we will make sure to get back to them later. So I will introduce our first panelist. It will be Lenka Felcmanová, who is the head of the Czech Expert Society for Inclusive Education and an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education at the Charles University. She is focused on support of education of students with learning disabilities, inclusive education, behavior management, promotion of well-being and trauma-informed approach at schools. Lenka, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I will share, hello everybody, I will share the presentation with you just in a little while. Hopefully everything works. So yeah, so do you see the presentation as a whole, or shall I skip to
we can see it, yes. Okay. Don't worry.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I represent Czech Expert Society for Inclusive Education, and just briefly about our organization. We were founded in 2011. I co-founded our organization with Klára Šimáčková-Laurenčíková, who is now the governmental body for support of human rights, but she's still in close connection with us. And we are an umbrella organization connecting academics, NGOs, teachers, headmasters, institutions, parents who promote inclusive education, as we see it as the most effective prevention of social exclusion of any kind. And because our cooperation with Klára originated at the Ministry of Education a decade ago. So we, from the very beginning, started to closely cooperate with institutions, not only Ministry of Education, but also Ministry of Health, Social Affairs, and others. And as we connect experts and academics, we also cooperate closely with other expert platforms, and we are trying to support schools, children from the bottom, but also significant part of our work is focused on advocacy and changes related to legislation or strategic documents. What we do, we have different activities, as I spoke already about its advocacy and activities. We issue official recommendations and statements on legislation proposals, or we are recommending amendments to different legislation documents. Generally, we formulate expert recommendations when it comes to strategies, and also providing advice to other institutions, but also we have a consultation center for parents, schools, so whoever needs the support. So we make sure that also we are in direct and intensive contact with children, their families, and teachers. We have a strong body focused on education. We call it Joseph Academy, and we have about 70 trainers at the moment, distributed all around the Czech Republic, and we provide courses, seminars, webinars, trainings. We focus on teachers, other professionals in education, but also in social and health area. We also train judicial experts and judges and the management of prisons. So the group is widening because one of our key focus at the moment is trauma-informed approach. It's our mission to implement trauma-informed approach to all services, public services. We are mainly focused on education, but also we are trying to spread the key principles of trauma-informed approach to all who work with children and families. And we have specific project activities where we usually pilot interventions in some regions, and we are trying, to find the good solution for our country. Usually, we get inspired by programs that are already evidence-based somewhere in the world, and we are trying to pilot them and set them for the context of the Czech Republic. So maybe the port project is focused on implementation of a trauma-informed approach, and PBIS, maybe you're familiar with this concept. It's a program supporting positive behavior at schools, and it's a very good program. It's very useful for adaptation of the crisis, so I will talk about it a little bit briefly. a trip 4 hours. It's a program of social emotional learning, which we also established here in Czech Republic to support post-pandemic recovery. Strong program is focused on support of newcomers. So it's our reaction to Ukraine crisis and other activity signals. As the project focused on early identification of children at risk for all professionals working with children, police officers, firefighters, teachers, of course, health professionals, social protection officers, social workers, and others. So I know I have very limited time, and yeah, the scope of our activities is getting bigger and bigger, but just to get idea what we do. And of course, it's been here said before. Also in Czech Republic, we found out that the already large inequities which we had in education before even widen it, and we saw increase in domestic violence and maltreatments in family, oftenly unrecognized or untreated. So we only knew it by the increase of the calls to crisis lines. And what we see, and you see also in your countries, is increase of children with problems in mental health. At Czech schools, the closure of Czech school was the longest within the whole Europe. So the impact of the social isolation of children and the lockdown restrictions are the most severe here, I believe. What we did at the very urgent moment, so the immediate response to the crisis, we created and very quickly offered courses, webinars that were focusing on dealing with the crisis. So stress, emotional management, support of well-being and mental health, how to deal with aggression, de-escalate, because we realized that it's a lot for many of us. So this was the first aid we provided. We were trying also to provide expert advice for schools on how to support children at risk, how to communicate and explain the situation to children when it comes to testing or other, the measures, especially with special focus on children with special needs, how to help them to prepare for this situation. Created many infographics and support materials, raising awareness on the topics of well-being, mental health care is important. We connected with Czech School Inspectorate, try to distribute the materials to schools. Also, we use social media to spread these infographics, because we understood that we need very simple information to be provided. People were overwhelmed and were not able to read massive handbooks or anything. We had public presentations also pointing out the children's mental health and its importance in the pandemic, because unfortunately in Czech Republic the mental health was not an issue before the pandemics. So we were we were advocating for many years to really do spot on this topic, and the pandemics gave it much bigger in urgency. So we were trying to convince politicians that it's topic to deal with. So these are just a few examples of much different one-pagers we distributed. We prepared them for parents of children with special needs, specifically also the specific group like children with autism that needed more guidance, how to deal with the situation, teachers. So we had targeted materials, simple but informative for different target groups. As I said, our big part of our work is advocacy. So we had appeals to government related to the recognition of mental health of children as a governmental priority, urging the return of children to school as soon as possible. we also connected with other stakeholders here in Czech Republic and issued open letter to Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport and all regional authorities. And we were asking for allowing children with intellectual disabilities and neurodevelopmental disabilities to be able to attend on-site education with, of course, covered protection. We issued recommendation for operation of special schools because these schools stayed open the longest, and I must say it was significant contribution of our organization, but of course we needed to protect children, protect teachers, to make sure that the infection will not spread among the kids and also the teachers, because usually in special schools there are children with more complex special needs, and they were more at a bigger threat of having problems when being infected by COVID. We were publishing statements and that were also criticizing some negative effects of some of the decision that Ministry of Education made at that time. So we were trying to point out what's wrong and how to fix it. We published plan for the mitigation of the negative effects of pandemics on children and youth, and we distributed to all key stakeholders in the Czech Republic and recommended to be used for the post-pandemic recovery plans. And we were strongly advocating that children's mental health will be covered by National Recovery Plan, because at the very beginning there was zero money devoted to this very important agenda. As I was already talking about, we introduced piloted programs supporting well-being and mental health at schools to support post-pandemic adaptation, so helping kids to regain social emotional skills, help them to adjust. So we selected several evidence-based programs which we adopted for the Czech context and made materials and trainings available for schools. What we learned, and
I'm very sorry, but if you could try to maybe speed it up a little bit,
yes,
because we
I
are
have
running...
one last slide here before me. So
perfect. Thank you.
I think I think everything was said many times before. Really, the in-person school attendance is necessary condition for children's mental health stability, and we know that digital teaching and learning can be beneficial in short term, but not in, it cannot be replaced the in-person teaching, and it's necessary to focus on well-being and mental health at schools at this time. And it's everything from me. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry for the interruption, but I would like to make sure that all the panelists can present the materials that they prepared. Thank you for telling us a little bit about this Czech context. I found it really interesting, as I am based in Prague, and I was not aware of all the issues mentioned by you, like the fact that within the European context, the closure of schools was the longest here in the Czech Republic. I have a lot of questions. I wrote them down, and we will get back to them during the discussion panel, because right now I would like to give the floor to the next of our speakers, as we are running a little bit behind of time. So the next panelist will be Matthias Weißschuh. He is an actor, singer, and a teacher of music and theater, my apologies, at the Otto-Nagel-Gymnasium in Berlin. His involvement in the Amelie Project, a European-wide initiative against online hate speech, was awarded the All Digital Award 2022. At the Otto-Nagel-Gymnasium, he's also leading the choir, the music ensemble, and he believes that building communities in school and teaching through democratic participation is key for modern education. The floor is yours, Matthias.
All right, thank you, Agnieszka. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I would start my presentation with sharing my story from the base out of the classroom. I can confirm all the findings. We had a difficult time during the pandemic. In our graduating class, so many people talked about depressive phases. They talked about suicidal thoughts. They got in trouble because they had one party at Christmas. And for me, it was like, this was the only moment they wanted to come together again. And then they got all the trouble from the teachers and parents. So I believe the most important thing in school is bringing people together, sharing communities. And this is one thing I want to talk about with this project. This is my school in Berlin, East Berlin, Germany. We have 900 students and around 80 teachers. They all are equipped with MacBooks. This is the most important thing about our school. They all have MacBooks. Many buy the MacBooks by their own, or the others get help by learning aid associations. So the money is there to help everybody, to equip them so we can work digitally. From the first day of the pandemic, all of our timetable was moved digitally. So we had the timetable from the first day, all the classes were held in remote learning. So this project got started in November 2021. It's a European-wide initiative against hate speech. So we got trained, 12 trainers from different countries got trained in this program with this material, and then we should share them in our school, trained another teachers. Then we built an internet platform to share our materials. We tried in our classroom, and this could then spread out into the world, I would say. And one part of this project was the Kind Speech Day competition. It was a competition where we should organize kind speech days in our school, so to share the message. It's part against hate speech, but the idea was not be against hate speech, but for kind speech. And when I introduced this to my class, they were, oh yeah, we heard so much about against hate speech. We know everything. They thought they know everything, but this new approach to be pro something was more interesting and new for them. So we had this project with two classes. One is my class, this is my class, 10-4, and one English course. And the interesting idea was that it was in between year groups. So it was not only one class, it was two, and they were mixed together. And this is also what they very liked and gave them motivation. So we had a kickoff day at the 23rd of May. We did brainstorming. We did talk about what can we do, which format should we use, which can be the effect, the digital impact, and how can we measure them. This is sometimes difficult because when we give something out, we don't know what happened. So how can we get something back, feedback back? And we talked about the manifesto. This is the manifesto we got from our partners to give them guidelines, what is important, criteria. First is maybe the most important, virtual is real. They are living in a virtual reality, but it is real as it is real as our reality, normal reality. Sometimes older teachers says, no, we should go back to, no, it's them reality. I talked in our last music class about music. How do they get educated about music? And I said, TikTok. This is their only way to music. So we have to give value to that. So we talked about formats, and this is the most important way to reach them digitally is Instagram. We decided we do everything or start with an Instagram campaign. We have already this channel. It already has 1,500 followers. So a lot of people who leave schools are coming back and looking at this channel. We have people from the government who's also looking what's going on in our school by looking at this channel. So it's important way to communication. So we built this campaign 6 weeks, different events. We split it into groups, and every group had one day they should organize. They think about what they can do and which formats they should use. The high motivation in the group was due to this cross-year groups between older and younger students, the competition character, ethics. They like to help. This is always what I get about kids when you ask them, can you help me? They want to help. This is, yeah, they want to do that. And in independent development, that they can create something by their own and not get controlled or guided. So in week 1, Agnieszka, can you tell me how many minutes I have left?
If it's possible to finish within the next 3 minutes, that would be perfect. But
all right. So in the first week, we started with our Instagram campaign. We introduced the project, talked what we're doing, what our goals are, why we're doing this, and we introduced what is hate speech. Inform the people, inform the community. It's all, we wanted to do something for the community, to share it, to bring people together digitally. We talked about an etiquette. So what we talk in our classroom, how we behave in a classroom, is also, we have to talk about how we should behave in virtual rooms. And then this is how we try to involve people. We try to make give feedback. They could, did you experience hate speech in the internet? Yes or no? So they can participate in this. And week 2, we talked about more on a scientific point of view. We also made it in English and in German, so reach both languages. What is hate speech? How can you identify it? Give them more criteria, how they identify first, all of that. Again, now you said, did you experience kind speech, hate speech, kind speech? Week 3, we have the results of our polls. 50% experience hate speech and a little bit less experience kind speech. So it's interesting how they see now what's going on in the internet. And now we said, okay, you experience not so much kind speech. We want to share kind speech with you. We want to do something. So we organized a button sale at one day in the school. So now we brought the internet to the analog world. This is the important connection we wanted to make. We sold these buttons for everybody for a small fee, 50 cents it was. And then interestingly, after the sale, what I love, then you find all these, and we also made like QR codes and messages everywhere around the school. And we shared, you're beautiful, you're nice. And you have these buttons. And now after 1 year, after this event, you still see the buttons at the backs of the students. And it's really nice. So it stays there. So you find all these messages in school. Then we also made like a movie about it. They made scenes, what cyber mobbing is doing to them. And what I like about this movie is also the connection about digital and analog things. When you look here.
Een paar seconden später.
So you also see they want to show in the movie how in the internet, these Instagram groups, the messages got shared. In week 5, we had no school. Everybody was out of school. So we couldn't do any event. And last week, we want to do a video and a song. We created a song with a trigger warning, because we want to share all the hate speeches they found in it. So they made research on the hate speech, and they wrote a song underneath, which is purely positive. You could say pathetic a little bit. Be brave, take courage, dare to do something, be brave. And this could be alone a little bit too pathetic, but with this visual level of hate speech and what awful things get said, this got a strong message. Just how it looked in the end. So a little bit underneath this trashy 80s sound, and underneath you hear hate speech, more hate speech coming. And these two levels gave it a very, for my aesthetical, interesting look. Yes, so from the button sale, the money we spent in for a former donation, we donated it to an event against hate speech. And yeah, and we finished the campaign with stay respectful. We hope we spread the message. And yes, thank you. That was the project.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for this beautiful intervention. I think that it is a very interesting concept to switch the focus from the hate speech to kind speech. So focus a little bit more on the positives and what we can use instead, how we can build this positive and affirming interactions. We don't have much time, so I will just ask one very quick question following this presentation. Because you've mentioned that the leaflets with QR codes, the buttons, that they are still there in the school. I've been wondering whether you had a chance to do any kind of follow-up after this project. I don't mean obviously systematic data collection research, but did you talk to the students? Do they see any long-term effects of this kind speech campaign?
The problem a little bit was that it was before the summer holidays, and then they got into the upper classes. So they were not my class anymore. So now they got into different groups. But we talked about it, and they talked that was the best project they did in school because of all the independent work. They talked about how they did affect other students, and they could make them. Because what I want to talk, they like the ethics, they want to help, they want to make people smile. And so they always talked about, oh, now they found our paper here, or they shared it on Instagram in their Instagram feed, how they found these papers. So it was these small moments of connection between each other that they talked about, and they talked about with a smile and with emotions, and lifted them up. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is a really inspiring testimony. And now we will move to our last panelist, and it will be Işık Tüzün. She's the director of the Education Reform Initiative, and independent and non-for-profit think and do tank that contributes to systematic transformation in education for the development of the child and society through sound evidence, constructive dialogue, and innovative critical thinking. Besides authoring research and policy reports on gender equality in education and refugee children's right to education, Işık worked in several NGO projects, such as Ashoka Foundation's Changemaker Classrooms project and BBOM Association's Participatory and Peaceful Classrooms project. And I will now leave the floor to you.
Okay. You can hear me, right? And see the presentation.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. And thanks to the presenters before me. So Agnieszka already introduced the Education Reform Initiative briefly, but I want to say a couple of words as well. So our core work is monitoring research and advocacy, and but also developing solutions and models to respond critical policy needs, and providing collaboration and learning platforms and tools to teachers have also been part of our work. Öğretmen Ağı, the Teachers Network, also operates under the Education Reform Initiative. The Teachers Network was launched 6 years ago by Education Reform Initiative as a pilot project, and currently it is more like a sister organization. It is a network through which teachers can collaborate with their colleagues and a wide range of experts and organizations from different disciplines. So some of what I'm going to present now will reflect their experiences as well. So soon after the pandemic started, we decided to focus our monitoring efforts to the effects of COVID-19 on the education system and to the needs and experiences of different stakeholders, primarily children from diverse backgrounds, youth, teachers, and parents. And around the same time, the Teachers Network started periodic questionnaires and meetings with teachers on their experiences to make sure that we redesign our activities accordingly, to offer spaces for sharing and also tools to improve the experiences of teachers, but also to make sure that we disseminate the views of teachers. Long Stories, which is a blog series by a former education reporter and journalist who is currently in our team, existed before the pandemic. In this series, we don't say long story short. Instead, we go for in-depth stories reflecting the diversity of experiences that cannot be revealed by existing education data. So we also published a report on the impact of COVID-19 during the first year of the pandemic. And last year, we commissioned a report that discusses how schools could better support children's well-being and become, in a way, social welfare institutions. We think that the link between the education system and social policy system in general is quite weak, and we need to strengthen it. That's one of the lessons actually we got during this period. And we also continue to publish our education monitoring reports, and we dealt specifically with the impact of COVID-19, and also since last year, resilience of the education system in a state of multiple crises has been one of the core perspectives in the report. And finally, we have recently started a new blog series. In Turkish, it's titled Etraflıca, which could be translated to English as thoroughly. In this series, we deal with chronic issues that are exacerbated by the pandemic and advocate for policies as free school lunches. So during this period, we've also promoted issues that are critical for the well-being of children and also the full realization of right to education, along with other rights of children. But we find them quite critical, but they're not really prioritized in the education system. So two prominent examples are play and movement. So we've been organizing these good practices in education conferences, and we organized the 18th conference in 2021 with the main theme being Our Task is to Play. So during the conference, through several different events, we tried to focus on different aspects and benefits of play. And when the pandemic started, we had already been involved in this project with Nike and the Ministry of National Organization. The main idea of the project was to promote movement in schools through supporting teachers. The project was obviously adversely affected by the pandemic, and especially during the lockdown periods. So we try to still, continue our efforts and promote movement at home during the lockdowns through some videos. and the partnership continued and recently ended, but I think, we were able to find alternative ways. And also, finally, in partnership with Hisar schools, we aim to initiate a debate on reimagining school with different perspectives and different experiences. So just a quick glance at some of the handbooks published by the Teachers Network. These handbooks were all developed in response to the needs identified by teachers themselves, and they were all, produced collectively with other stakeholders and teachers. And during this period, I also wanted to say a few things about dialogue, collaboration, solidarity, partnerships, and networks. I think that they were critical for us to make our work more effective, but also in a way they played an important part in our well-being as people working in this field. So in addition to maintaining existing partnerships and active engagement in local, national, regional, and international networks, we have actively pursued new partnerships and have become part of new networks to act in solidarity and seek collective impacts for quality education for all. So we initiated collaboration with different NGOs on early childhood education, education in rural areas, and girls' education. We participated in new working groups and networks, again, on girls' education and gender equality, refugee children's education, protecting children during emergencies. And also we're part of this working group on measuring the collective impact of NGOs working for teacher empowerment in Turkey. And we also introduced new collaboration groups on issues like early childhood education and climate crisis, on green pedagogy. The teacher communities led by teachers and facilitated by the Teachers Network also proliferated during this period and focused on so many critical issues. And we've also seen an expansion of partnerships between the Teachers Network and a wide range of stakeholders. So I don't want to go into detail about the recurring themes and issues in our work, but just you can see them on the slide. Of course, we were able to work on some of them in a more in-depth manner, but still, these were the common issues that we tried to promote in our work. And I can, just overall, I can say that the pandemic, but not only our perspectives and priorities were shaped by this period, but not only because of the pandemic, but also because of other, multiple crises we've been going through. And not only ecological crisis, but also social, economic, and political crisis as well. And I think it's reflected in these priorities and themes you see here. So I think I'm done. So I try to be as fast as possible, and
wonderful.
I hope I could give an idea.
Thank you very much. So given that you've managed to be pretty concise, we still have time for one very quick question. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your experience and this sort of holistic and multi-level approach of your organization is, I think, very much in line also with the recommendations of our project that we will in a few minutes introduce to the audience. So I have been wondering, because if you strive for this sort of systemic change, rethinking the educational system, I'm sure that there are also certain barriers. I've been wondering what stakeholders you would need to come on board, but maybe you haven't noticed enough support from their side.
It's a big question, and I think, it's in a way difficult to answer, but I can say something maybe more general also in relation to the fact sheet. I think one of the issues that, we try to initiate more dialogue on is the purposes of education. And so currently we're in a, it's the case in Turkey, but probably in other countries as well. We try to operate in a really polarized environment. So it's not only one actor, but, just for many actors, even in the civil society, we feel this kind of social and political polarization, which makes it quite difficult to find common ground and, just continue dialogue. And unless we're able to do that, and I think education needs to play a critical role in that, to kind of prevent and repair the polarization we're currently experiencing. I think we won't be able to have any sustainable results in the short term. So of course, many actors present many different barriers, but I think that's the whole context is problematic, and we have to work towards changing that together.
Thank you very much for this answer. I think that right now we can very smoothly move to the presentation of our recommendations, because we do also emphasize the fact how important is solidarity and multi-actor collaboration. So as you mentioned, it's not possible to make any change alone. There needs to be this sort of common will to do that. So Charula, I will leave it to you to present our recommendations right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Agnieszka. And thank you very much for the previous presentations. Actually, you will find some of the very interesting things you mentioned, but also the inspiration. Some of the things you've done, very inspirational. Actually, they tie in very well with our recommendations. So I'm going to try and make a link wherever possible with your presentations, but of course, we're going to have time to discuss afterwards as well. So we have 5 sets of recommendations that we have developed as part of RESISTIRÉ. So the first one is about the importance of educational practices and policies being, of course, evidence-based and underpinned by the analysis of intersectional data, which captures the needs of heterogeneous populations. So what we think is very important, but I think some of you already have referred to that, is kind of collecting data about the needs of diverse families, parents and students, and also that this information needs to actually be broken down by gender and intersectional considerations, so that the policies and the support that we develop is actually tailored and it is fit for purpose. And teachers, we think, is a very important stakeholder whose experience needs to inform these policies and initiatives. The second set of recommendations is very much about what Agnieszka just mentioned, is about fostering multi-actor collaboration and engagement to support vulnerable students, parents, and teachers. And we need to identify vulnerable groups and support them to mitigate risks in terms of what we mentioned before, in terms of educational outcomes, but also mental health outcomes. So we need much more local and national resources to be provided to address these needs. And of course, we need to support the mental health and well-being of parents and educators, as they have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. We've seen teachers being isolated in their roles and having no training, but also parents, especially from socioeconomic backgrounds, needing more support to support their children. The third set of recommendations centers around the development of more inclusive, flexible, but also student-centered educational practices and inclusive digital solutions through multi-stakeholder collaboration. And what we suggest here is very much about building advocacy groups, having better cooperation between schools and civil society, which can identify these diverse needs and support vulnerable groups, subsequently put pressure on policymakers. And such closer collaboration, I think, has potential to empower stakeholders, but more importantly, to nurture students as active and democratic citizens. And I kind of think of what Matthias was talking about, students want to help, and, we have to give them that opportunity to help and lead and co-create, so we really need to put them, to give them that space. But then the last thing we also mentioned in terms of this recommendation is also the importance for reviewing and updating teacher training. And we talk not just about digital skills, but also thinking about inclusive pedagogy, practices for hybrid and online teaching. I think that talks a bit to what the last presentation was about. I saw a lot of the handbooks for teachers, you know, kind of like looking at these the needs that teachers have, and you know how we can address those needs and how we can help them and support them. In terms of the fourth set of recommendations is actually inspired by the better story I mentioned before from Scotland. So it's about introducing equity audits and create opportunities and spaces for early detection and prevention of mental health problems in the student population. Of course, we have, you know, there are risks with online education, and it is important actually to establish safe computer and internet usage practices so we can mitigate online violence and cyberbullying. But also we see that there is a lot of emphasis on, you know, a lot of funding has been allocated to digital training, but there needs to be an emphasis as well about the social dimension of schooling to mitigate isolation. And I think some of the presentations actually touched upon this, you know, the connectivity, about sharing, you know, communities, and about providing opportunities for bringing together the communities. We also, as part of this recommendation, we're kind of suggesting an importance of providing safe spaces for mental health concerns to be raised, but also being followed up even beyond the classroom. And the last one, and I think again it was related to one of the presentations about, I think it was the first presentation about, you know, they were providing some really interesting webinars and courses on skills, you know, for self-care, for well-being, and we recommend that, you know, life skills training should be provided for students in order to build capacity for self-care, for well-being, inclusive communication and behavior. And I think that also relates to kind of, you know, the kind speech and identifying hate speech that was mentioned before. The last recommendation, a bit more broader, it's actually about, but not, you know, still as important, to enhance EU level, national-wide and regional collaboration. So we need much more collaboration at all levels. And one of the things we will recommend would be a community of practice for teachers to learn from existing practices, exchange with each other. And this can feed into more comprehensive national policies, but it could also provide some space for potentially flexible and autonomous approaches from teachers, but also schools. And I think, again, that ties in with, you know, a lot of the presentations mentioned about, you know, building platforms and sharing tools and strategies and handbooks that have developed during the pandemic, which seems like, you know, where there are things happening, and lots of activities happening at the moment with the pandemic. So it's very, very nice to see that. So I think I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much, Charula. So now that we are all acquainted with the recommendations of the RESISTIRÉ project, I would like to move to the first part of the discussion panel. And so before we move to this more open form of a discussion, I would like to start from asking our panelists how those recommendations resonate with their experience. You've already made this sort of connection right now in your presentation from our perspective, from the perspective of the project consortium, but I would like to maybe make a round with our speakers and ask them what of the recommendations they do agree on, what they think maybe should be added, what is missing, as the project is still ongoing and we are working on the third cycle of the RESISTIRÉ project. Any feedback is welcomed. So maybe let's start from Lenka. Let's do it the same order as the order of the presentations.
Yes, I think, yeah, what I would like to stress is really the consideration of support of mental health and well-being of professionals working with children, teachers mainly, and parents, because we at the first stage focused a lot on support of children, but we realized, as you did, that without adults who are regulated, who are able to address the needs of children, the well-being and support of mental health of children cannot be done. So yeah, all the measures that are targeting at teachers, parents, and helping them with their well-being are crucial, important, because without that we would not have capacities to support children well. So this is something I would like to stress out.
Thank you very much. We will definitely get back to that in a second, but now I would also like to ask Matthias for his insights.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm all these findings. What is a pain in the ass to say is we also have to stress that we have to make sure that the digital infrastructure is given. And it's such a different, if I look at my school where it is given, but it took a long time before to build all of that. And now the pandemic hit, we could use it. And still other schools are now having to get up. And so it's still the basis of everything, that everybody Wi-Fi works and all of this. What I also found that we have to provide analog spaces. So you talked about that they cannot work at home because there are 4 people living in one room. I don't know. Sometimes you are scared what's happening inside these homes, and the violence went up. You also need this analog space. It's still important. We talk about digital spaces, but we should not forget that the school as a space where they can find safety is also very important. And yeah, this connection between where's analog, where's digital, it's their world, and this connection, we have to explore this. And we cannot talk about this is digital, this is analog. No, it's going together. And we have to make sure that this is, acknowledged.
Thank you very much. I think that this is indeed very important, and we are all still trying to figure out how to do that, how to sort of combine those 2 spaces. Işık, do you have anything to add from your experience, from the experience of your organization?
Sure, there are so many overlapping issues and recommendations, so I'm not going to list them all, and I'm not going to repeat the previous speakers. If I were to choose one to, say it here, it's the section on lack of communication and consultation on policy development and implementation. I find it quite critical. It definitely resonates with our experience, and it's not only during the pandemic, but it's a really long-standing issue that children's right to participation in decision-making processes. It's an area where we don't see meaningful change. So I think it's quite important, that message. And also, if I were to link this with my previous comment about the purpose of education, I already said that we need we need to have a dialogue about the purpose of education, since I believe, most of the issues we face today and the current shortcomings can be traced back to a lack of common understanding when it comes to the purposes of education. But most importantly, children and youth should be part of this dialogue. So that's how I'm going to link both comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now let's move to this open discussion. I would also encourage you that if you have any questions to the other speakers, naturally feel free to do that. And I would also like to remind our attendees to write their questions in the chat if they have any. What I would maybe like to start from, given that for the moment I do not see any hands raised, is something that was also already mentioned during the presentations. So the fact that we are currently living through various crises. So the pandemic was the first one, but then there was the Russian aggression in Ukraine, the current energy crisis. We have been dealing with a lot of unexpected critical situations over the past couple of years. I have been wondering whether from your experience, and this is again a question to all of the speakers, we have learned anything during the pandemic from the point of view of the educational sphere. Can we somehow use the lessons from the first crisis to deal with the current ones better? Please, Matthias.
Yes, what I find very important is the digital environment is not the solution for everything. We cannot put everything digitally and then this is the savior of our education system. My brother was making, he's a mathematician, and he said, oh, if it's working like this, we can scale it up. We have in Germany, we have, especially in Berlin, a big teacher problem, not enough teachers. So we could use one teacher and maybe teach like 100 kids. If they're all listening and you can just give the facts out and then you can Moodle test and then you can also automatically do the test, correct the test, he can scale it up. But then I think, no, what we learned is we miss emotions, real emotions. Even when you have a mask, you don't see the smiling, you don't see, it was such a different way of all the social environment. We missed this in the pandemic. And it's not about facts. Education is not just get the facts and learn it. No, it's how to deal with each other, how to make jokes also. And maybe we find also solution for this in the digital world, but it's also something we have to bring back to and get acknowledged. And if I can make give value also to my, it's said not enough times, music and theater, where you can experience these emotions also with other people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it was also strongly related to what Işık said before. So this necessity of rethinking education, of understanding that it is not only about learning facts and acquiring knowledge, but there is much more to it. I can see that Lenka would like to add something, so I would
just like to fully agree that what we learn is the importance of social and emotional skills and their support. Children, we're trying to respond to the stress connected to pandemics, and very often they started with strategies that are not healthy or sustainable. So we are dealing with many problems such as self-harm, using technologies for regulation with all the negative effects, and using the nicotine bags and kratom and all the other things that can help to regulate, but not a sustainable and healthy way. So teaching the skills, how to manage the stress, how to deal with inconvenient feelings. This is all new to kids. We didn't teach them before. So the importance of teaching these skills and implementing them into the curricula, I think, is the crucial thing. In the Czech Republic, we are just in a debate about where we opened the curriculum, and now we are trying to influence its outcome. It's difficult, the discussions. Of course, you have many different stakeholders, but I believe it's easier now to discuss about the importance of these skills than it was before the pandemics. And it gives us a window of opportunity that finally these topics will be more covered systematically in a continuum, raising up with the children, because the emotional literacy for children in the first grade is connected with different experience information than for the 9th graders. So also to build up the system, helping children to grow within the topics and developing the skills, development accurate is important.
Thank you very much. I think that indeed this is something that we can consider to be a positive effect of the pandemic, the fact that we actually started talking about mental health, not only of the students, but the population in general, because this is something that before we definitely did not put enough emphasis on. So it is, as I said, one of the positive outcomes of what we've been through. I can see that we have a question from one of the participants of the webinar. So please, Margarita, you can ask it right now.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Margarita from the European Agency of Special Needs and Inclusive Education. And we are also having a project right now about how to make education more resilient, also with the experiences from the crisis, the different crises we experience right now. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with all the aspects that have mentioned. We have similar results, and I would just want to raise the aspect of accessibility, because when we think about equal and equitable quality education for all learners, and we think about accessibility, this can mean accessibility for educational content, but what has just been mentioned as well, well-being and mental health issues, they need to be accessible as well. And there we come to what has just been mentioned and discussed before from Matthias, that we need to have contact, and we can't do everything on a digital in a digital environment, but it helps a lot. So that's what we have learned, and I want to just bring up the term of accessibility in general, and maybe ask what you think about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would any of the speakers like to comment on that?
Okay, maybe I can start. Yeah, what I talked about is about, first of all, the infrastructure. If you don't have the infrastructure, this is very important. And we know from the lessons, if somebody is in their brain and have problems, today I got handed out a test, and if they think about all the grades and, okay, I got to get bad grades, they are not here for the rest of the class, because they are thinking about themselves, this emotional regulation. They also have to learn from the 7th grade on. And I think what's very important, what was my point? Accessible. Yeah, what you talked about is, in the internet, I cannot see these emotions. As a teacher, if I'm really taking care of my students, if I have one look, I see, is she in her head? Is she thinking about the test? Is she having other troubles? Then I can take her, talk to her. I can manage all this. In the digital work, I don't have this. I just send the task out and I get the results back, and I can comment on this. And this is what is so easy in the analog way, and we need this diagnosis of the mental state. And I see that as a teacher. Yes.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I think that there are so many dimensions to accessibility. And one of the examples is also something that maybe not on purpose, but you, Matthias, did mention in your presentation. So the fact that the whole campaign, it was done in 2 languages. So it was not only German, but it was also English. I think this is currently a very important issue in some of the countries, like in the Czech Republic, given the current situation in Ukraine and the refugees that are coming to other European countries. I would like to ask you what resources, and I don't mean only financial resources, I also mean human resources, material resources. what do we need in order to make the education more accessible, in order to ensure participation for all the students, and learning, efficient learning for all the students? I know this is a tough question. Do you have any ideas? Please, Lenka.
Yeah, I'll take the word because unfortunately I have to leave 5 minutes before the end of the meeting. For me, and I think it will, I will just repeat what Işık has already said, to have a joint vision, how things should be done, to have wider agreement among different stakeholders that there are key things we have to work on, because I don't know if in Czech Republic the fragmentation of different areas is very specific. So we deal with education and then social support, but they have very hard time to communicate and to set up the goals that are around the child and the families with the different stakeholders coming in. So this multidisciplinary cooperation and multidisciplinary agreements are very important, because if we don't have this, we have a lot of individual resources, good ideas, but it's not an orchestra playing together. So I think we need more time in discussions across the different sectors, because mental health, well-being at schools, there are other stakeholders to be involved, especially in these 3-tiered support, where we have children with more significant needs. The school cannot be alone, and we have to have joint agreed strategies. And I think it showed us, the pandemic showed us, we cannot work alone. We have to connect and agree and make functional strategies, and then everything is much easier. And when we know our roles, where is our place and what we do and what others do and how they can help us, it's also helping our well-being, so we don't feel overwhelmed that we have to solve all the problems that we see, because the problems are now more complex. So that's my contribution. And also, I will use this floor to say goodbye to all of you. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I hope that we will have some more time to discuss in the future. So goodbye to all of you, and have a wonderful Christmas time.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here, and we really appreciate your participation and the experience that you've shared with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Goodbye.
Matthias, please. I can see that you're raising your hand.
Yes. Maybe I repeat myself, but I think what's very important is you need to build communities. You need to be communities, and not communities, but with values. You need to share values. I cannot help everybody, I cannot do everybody, but they can help each other. And if they get supported, we had now students from Ukraine coming into our class. The most important thing, that they get welcomed. Some students speak Ukraine or Russian, and then they could translate, so they could help. They are making things accessible by their ethics. And I think this is very important to build communities and share these. And so everybody can come together.
Thank you very much. And I will also give the floor to Işık, because we do not have more time, a lot of time, sorry. So I would like to have the opportunity to listen to all of you.
Okay, thank you. So I don't want to repeat myself and the other speakers, and I try to avoid overgeneralizing, but still, I'll try to say a couple of things. First, I think we should, just learn more from the practitioners' experiences at both the classroom level and school level, and what kind of strategies they actually develop and what type of barriers they face. I think it's a solid ground to start from. But also there is this. It's it's not the same in every context, but most relationships are kind of, but I see a lot of distrust, to say it bluntly, you know, between different stakeholders, and relationships are not necessarily based on trust. So we have to kind of find ways to build more trust between, you know, the teachers, the ministry, the parents and children. And so, and for that, we have to focus on maybe transparency, participation, and accountability. So these are really systemic issues. That's why I was afraid of, you know, overgeneralizing. But I think this trust should be one of the key barriers that we have to tackle in a more structural way.
Thank you very much. And I would like to just make a reference to the first thing that you've said and congratulate you on putting such a strong emphasis on the teachers, because I think that very often their perspective and their experience is still being overlooked when we talk about making change in education, making policies. And I've seen that a lot of materials produced by your organization is taking this perspective of the teachers. I will right now give the floor to Charula, because I know that she wanted to say a couple of words as a closing remarks.
I think it's more like a reflection, you know. I mean, it was very interesting to hear, you know, all the kind of, you know, interesting activities that the panelists have done. And it just kind of like, I was thinking, you know, the window of opportunity was very funny, because I actually put down in my notes window of opportunity what Lenka mentioned before. And I do see a lot of things that have been mentioned, you know, I know the pandemic has been quite difficult for everyone, but, you know, kind of like looking at the positive sides as a window of opportunity. And there were a lot of things that came up about this that, in a way, were ignored or overlooked before the pandemic, the emphasis on mental health and well-being. And now it is an opportunity to look at this much more closely in relation to education. Again, the emphasis on connectivity, on play, on emotions, on actually bringing together communities and share values. I think these are all, again, opportunities, you know, that we have now with the pandemic to kind of like look at the education system again and say, okay, how can we make it better? You know, now the pandemic has kind of emphasized and, you know, put attention in a few things that we really need to do something about. So I think if we take that as kind of like maybe learn from the pandemic and look at these special issues that are coming out, which were there, but it's just the pandemic have actually put a spotlight on them. And I think the interventions that the panelists have done, you know, are inspirational, and it kind of like shows, I don't know, maybe the window of opportunity is a wider, better story, if you want, if things, of course, move to the right direction. But, you know, there's definitely potential for that. So many thanks for the inspirations and the contributions from the panelists.
Thank you very much, Charula, and that was such a good recap that I feel like I have no work to do here right now. But we are getting to the end of this webinar. So I wanted to first of all sincerely thank to our panelists once again for accepting our invitation and for sharing with us their stories and their perspectives. It was incredibly interesting, especially since they are all coming from different countries, and so the realities are also different, but we can see that all in all there are the same core systemic problems to be solved. I would also like to thank all the attendees for being here today, and I would like to encourage all of you to reach out if you have any comments, any feedback on not only this event, but also our recommendations. We are always happy to receive them. So with that, I will close this webinar. Once again, thank you very much, and hopefully see you during some other events. Goodbye.